I want to welcome you to this evening's presentation. We are so fortunate to have our friend Dr. Chris Ford be our guest this evening, and I'll mention what he's talking about here in just a minute. My name is Jeff O'Keefe. I'm the Executive Director of Zen Peacemakers, and I welcome you and thank you for spending part of your evening with us. Dr. Ford is going to talk about the Dharma of Deterrence, a Zen practitioner's reflections on 2 decades in the weapons of mass destruction world. And Dr. Ford is a former Assistant Secretary of State. And as we were just talking about before we opened up to everyone, he lives within the Beltway, and which is unique for many of us. I live decidedly outside the Beltway at 7,000 feet in the mountains. So anyway, I will turn this over. Chris, I'll turn this over to you. And once again, thank you so much for doing this for us. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. It should be rich.
So Jeff, thanks. I just want to give a brief introduction. It's really an honor for me to introduce my friend. I love calling him Dr. Chris Ford, to the Zen Peacemaker community. I met Chris through Roshi Joan Halifax 7 years ago after she heard of my work on the right side of the aisle on behalf of climate. And she knew Chris from having his participation in her chaplaincy, Buddhist chaplaincy training program a couple of years earlier, and thinking that it would be useful for the two of us to meet because he was a senior Republican attorney for one of the important Senate committees in DC. Chris and I immediately connected deeply, particularly as we were rare birds, being Buddhists and Republicans or conservatives. So we had a little caucus of 2 for a while. I hope you had a chance to see his impressive resume. But let me quickly recap. Since 1997, Chris has spent most of his career working on behalf of our country in public service roles as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Naval Reserve, as a diplomat, as a senior staff person for various committees in the Senate, and for various administrations. He has an undergraduate degree from Harvard, a law degree from Yale, and a doctorate from Oxford in international relations. Sounds like a hat trick, Chris. He's published 3 books, and as I mentioned, he's a Buddhist chaplain. He's also an active participant in martial arts and a loving father and husband. For many people, it's hard to wrap your mind around what it is to be a Buddhist, but also work in the middle of nuclear policy. I expect some of what he has to say will be provocative, but I cannot imagine anyone better than Chris to use Buddhist teachings to navigate that very difficult area on behalf of all sentient beings. I look forward to his perspective on the Dharma of Deterrence, and I hope what will be an active Q&A. Chris, Dr. Ford, it's yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant. It's a pleasure. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's great to talk to you all. And thanks, Jeff, and everyone else for having me speak. As a sometime student of my dear friend Roshi Joan, as you mentioned, and as a Zen practitioner who unfortunately only met Bernie Glassman on one occasion in connection with a lecture that he gave out at Upaya quite a few years ago now, it's really quite sort of humbling and a bit intimidating to be talking to the member circle at ZPI. So I'm really glad, Grant, that we have your steady and reassuring hand here as our master of ceremonies. So thanks for that. For my remarks, as you know, I've focused in on what I hope you guys will find to be an interesting topic, and I guess what's surely an unusual one. My reflections as a Buddhist on a career spent in the nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence business. Now just for protocol purposes, these are of course only my own views. I would not dream of attributing them to anyone else, and I don't expect you'll necessarily agree with my perspectives, for they are probably pretty idiosyncratic, but I'm really grateful for the chance to engage with such a thoughtful audience, and I look forward in particular to our discussion. But let me start by just making the point that I never actually set out to get into the nuclear weapons business. If you'd asked me 20 years ago what I was professionally, I would have told you that I was a government oversight lawyer, or maybe more specifically, an intelligence oversight lawyer. In those days, I worked for Senate committees, committee staffs, including doing legal oversight of the US intelligence community on the staff of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. So at that time, I was, maybe 20 years ago, I was also just at that point beginning to identify as a Buddhist, having begun sitting with a Korean Zen group that was across the river, across the Potomac in Alexandria, Virginia. It was only about 2003 or so that the opportunity came along to move into the executive branch as a political appointee at the time, dealing with arms control and nuclear weapons sorts of issues. And I've been eyebrow deep in all that stuff ever since in the policy world, and a Buddhist the whole time. So that combination, as Grant, I'm sure will smile, that combination has sometimes been, I'm sure, confusing to my friends and colleagues, both in the hawkish world of foreign and national security policy in two successive Republican presidential administrations, but also in the Buddhist community, such as at the Upaya Zen Center, where I graduated from its first chaplaincy program back in 2010. So that combination may seem a bit weird, I guess, but I guess from my perspective, I've long felt that unexpected juxtapositions can be really great opportunities for learning and for practice. I think of this a little bit as if it were almost chemistry in a sense, right? Because in chemistry, interesting reactions don't occur in the center of a homogeneous substance, but rather on its margins where it abuts something different. Homogeneous centers, if you will, are pretty static things, but boundaries are often really catalytic, and that's where interesting reactions occur. And what I think is true of chemical substances is surely true, perhaps even more so, of human cultures and subcultures. My own view is that conceptual and intellectual monocultures, if you will, tend to be pretty sterile places, whereas boundary zones are where reactions and transformations occur. So although I can't speak, really frankly, either to what my work in the WMD world has meant to my Buddhist friends, or my Buddhism has meant to my colleagues in the national security policy community, I think the very oddness of being a Buddhist working on WMD sorts of issues, it's certainly, as I see it at least, it's encouraged me to grapple with professional ethics on a sort of world historical scale, if you will, in ways that I probably would never have had to face otherwise. So for me, it's been, I hope, and I think, very interesting and beneficial. Whether it has been interesting and beneficial to others in engaging with me, I'm not the one to say. But in any event, as Grant alluded to, back in 2009, after I left the executive branch for the first time, I wrote an essay that was published by Upaya very graciously, entitled Nukes and the Vow, Security Strategy as Peacework. And in that essay, I stressed what I thought was very much a challenge that I felt to me that a Buddhist faces, inherent in any act of consequential choice making, if you will. And that is the problem of reconciling the objective of preventing or relieving suffering, as we must, with the inescapability of the not knowing, if you will, that Zen peacemakers have as the first of the three tenets. In this respect, from a policymaker's perspective, Buddhist ethics, at least has always struck me at least, as being remarkably indeterminate, if that makes sense, when it comes to the complexities of operational policy decisions, if you will, in the policy arena. Buddhist ethics may say a great deal about where you should be coming from in doing policymaking, that is to say, where your heart is and where your heart should be. But that's not the same thing as prescribing exactly where you should be going in terms of specific policy prescriptions. I think ultimately that's probably more of a feature than a bug, but it's certainly challenging, and it does demand, I would argue, a great deal of us by denying us the ability to think that we have easy and preordained answers. And I think that the tenet of not knowing just accentuates this point, reminding us that rigid certainties are the near enemy, if you will, the dark shadow side of insight. To me, this at least signals pretty clearly that seeking and adhering to fixed and rigid answers to human problems is not really skillful means. and it's not upaya. And we would surely fall into delusion and into attachment if we presumed that Buddhism confers upon us some kind of substantive infallibility or dictates every specific policy outcome.